History is written in blood more than ink. The most brutal wars are not simply the largest battles. They are the ones that turned entire regions into graveyards, erased generations, and left scars that still shape the map. Tonight, we examine the wars that inflicted the highest human cost, the stories people were told about why they began, the deeper forces that actually drove them, and the conflicts that may yet surpass them. This is not a celebration of violence. It is an attempt to see it clearly, past, present, and possible future. Before we get into it, for more videos like this about the history of important things, how they are and how they shape today, and predictions of what they might look like in the future, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our videos. World War II. We begin with the deadliest war in recorded history, the Second World War, 1939 to 1945. Between 70 and 85 million people died. Soldiers, civilians, prisoners, the starved, the bombed, the systematically murdered. Cities were erased. Entire populations were targeted for elimination. The public story was straightforward. In Europe, Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland triggered Allied declarations of war. In Asia, Japanese expansion and the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States fully in. The stated causes were aggression, fascism, militarism, and the need to stop them. The deeper drivers were more tangled. The Treaty of Versailles after the First World War left Germany humiliated and economically crippled, creating fertile ground for radical nationalism. The Great Depression radicalized politics across the industrial world. In Asia, Japan sought resources and empire, as Western powers still dominated colonial territories. Ideology mattered, racial hierarchy in Nazi Germany, imperial destiny in Japan. But so did raw power, oil, steel, and living space. Once the killing machine started, industrial capacity and total mobilization turned it into something previous generations could not have imagined. The Holocaust and the atomic bombings were not side effects. They were the logic of total war taken to its extreme. That war redrew borders, created new superpowers, and still shapes alliances and nuclear strategy today. The Mongol Conquests. Centuries earlier, the Mongol conquests of the 13th and 14th centuries may have killed a comparable share of the world's population at the time. Estimates range from 30 to 70 million across Eurasia. Cities from Beijing to Baghdad were put to the sword. Irrigation systems were destroyed. Entire regions depopulated. The official Mongol narrative was divine mandate. Heaven had granted Genghis Khan and his successors the right to rule the world. Resistance invited annihilation. Submission brought order and trade under the Pax Mongolica. In reality, the Mongols were steppe warriors operating a highly efficient military system against fragmented, often decadent sedentary empires. Climate shifts, overpopulation on the steppe, and the simple calculus of plunder and tribute drove expansion. Once momentum built, reputation for terror became a weapon itself: surrender or die. The brutality was strategic as much as cultural. They didn't invent conquest, but they scaled it with ruthless consistency across the largest contiguous land empire in history. The trade networks and demographic shocks that followed still echo in the genetic and cultural maps of Eurasia. The Taiping Rebellion. In the mid-19th century, China endured the Taiping Rebellion. A self-proclaimed younger brother of Jesus, Hong Xiuquan, led a millenarian uprising that lasted from 1850 to 1864. Death toll estimates run from 20 to 30 million, more than the First World War. The Qing dynasty nearly collapsed. Provinces were devastated. The stated cause on the rebel side was religious and moral purification. The Manchu rulers were demons, and a heavenly kingdom must replace them. The king framed it as banditry and heresy that had to be crushed. Actual causes included massive population growth outstripping land and food, official corruption, the disruptive effects of the Opium Wars and unequal treaties with Western powers, and a rigid examination system that left talented men frustrated. When a charismatic leader fused Pleistocene-inspired theology with Chinese grievances, the result was apocalyptic civil war. Similar dynamics, demographic pressure, weak central authority, and ideological fervor, appear in other Chinese disasters, including the An Lushan Rebellion centuries earlier. These internal catastrophes weakened China for generations and helped set the stage for the revolutionary upheavals of the 20th century that still influence the country's politics and worldview. World War I. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, killed 15 to 22 million. Industrialized slaughter in the trenches, poison gas, machine guns, and artillery created a meat grinder that shocked a generation. The public explanation was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, alliance obligations, and the need to stop civilization against militarism. Deeper causes included rigid alliance systems that turned a regional crisis into a continental one, nationalist rivalries, arms races, colonial competition, and the belief among many elites that war would be short and purifying. Once mobilized, no government could easily admit the cost was not worth the stakes. The war destroyed empires and planted the seeds of the next one. Its unresolved tensions, economic wreckage, and ideological radicalization directly shaped the world that produced the Second World War, and many of the institutions and fault lines we still live with. The 30 Years' War. 2 centuries earlier, the 30 Years' War in Central Europe from 1618 to 1648 killed an estimated 4 to 12 million, a catastrophic percentage of the population in the German lands. It began as a conflict between Catholic and Protestant states within the Holy Roman Empire. Religion was the stated cause. In practice, it became a free-for-all of dynastic ambition, French efforts to weaken the Habsburgs, Swedish intervention, and pure predation by mercenary armies that lived off the land. Famine, disease, and atrocity followed the armies. When the war finally ended, the map of Europe had been redrawn by exhaustion as much as principle. The peace settlement and the principle of state sovereignty that emerged still underpin much of the modern international order. Other high-intensity conflicts. Other wars belong on any list of extreme brutality. The Napoleonic Wars killed several million and introduced mass conscription and total mobilization on a European scale. The American Civil War combined new industrial weapons with the determination to fight to the finish over Union and slavery, producing death rates that shocked contemporaries. In the 20th century, the Russian Civil War, the Chinese Civil War, and the wars in Korea and Vietnam added millions more through combat, famine, and political killing. In each case, the official stories emphasized ideology, liberation, or defense. The underlying drivers repeatedly included state collapse, competition for resources and legitimacy, and the willingness of leaders to accept enormous human costs to achieve or retain power. Each left institutional, demographic, and psychological legacies that continue to influence politics, alliances, and collective memory. These wars share patterns. Public justifications almost always emphasize defense, justice, or destiny. The deeper engines are usually a mix of resource competition, demographic pressure, technological change that makes killing more efficient, institutional failure, and the belief that the other side can be broken. Ideology and grievance supply the fuel and the moral permission. Once the threshold of total war is crossed, restraint becomes difficult. Understanding those patterns is how the past continues to shape the present, and how we can better read the risks ahead. Future wars. What comes next? Prediction is uncertain, but certain pressures are visible. The most dangerous near to medium-term risk remains great power confrontation, particularly involving the United States and China over Taiwan and the Western Pacific, or a wider NATO-Russia conflict that expands beyond Ukraine. Official narratives would center on democracy versus authoritarianism, sovereignty, and alliance commitments. Actual drivers would include control of critical technology and supply chains, sea lanes, status, and the fear that the other side is gaining irreversible advantage. A direct war between nuclear-armed states would be the most destructive in history if it escalates. Timelines are unknowable, but the window of highest risk is often described by analysts as the late 2020s through the 2030s, when military balances and domestic political pressures may align unfavorably. Deterrence has held so far. It is not guaranteed forever. A second cluster involves regional wars that could draw in larger powers, the Middle East, where Iranian, Israeli, Gulf, and non-state actors already operate in a volatile environment, or South Asia, where India and Pakistan remain nuclear-armed rivals with unresolved territorial disputes. Stated causes would be security, terrorism, or historical claims. Deeper causes include water stress, demographic youth bulges, weak institutions, and the domestic political utility of external confrontation. Any of these could intensify in the 2030s if climate stress and economic shocks compound existing tensions. A third longer-term possibility is conflict driven by climate disruption, mass migration, and resource scarcity, particularly water and arable land in already fragile regions of Africa, the Middle East, and parts of South Asia. These would rarely be labeled climate wars by the participants. They would be framed as border defense, ethnic survival, or anti-terror campaigns. The underlying pressure would be environmental carrying capacity colliding with population and governance failure. Such conflicts are more likely to be chronic and multi-sided than single decisive campaigns, and they could intensify from the 2030s onward as projected temperature and precipitation shifts take hold. Technological change adds a new layer. Autonomous systems, cyber operations that can cripple infrastructure, and the potential weaponization of artificial intelligence could compress decision times and raise the risk of rapid escalation. They do not guarantee war, but they change the speed and opacity of crisis. No war is inevitable.
The same species that produced the Mongol armies and the industrial slaughter of the 20th century also produced the institutions, treaties, and mutual deterrence that have so far prevented a Third World War. Understanding the gap between the stories we tell about war and the forces that actually produce it is one of the few tools we have. The most brutal wars of the past are not only failures of morality, they were failures of foresight and restraint under pressure. The most brutal wars of the future, if they come, will likely follow the same pattern: public language of necessity and justice, covering competition for power, resources, and survival in a crowded, warming, technologically accelerating world. Whether they remain in the realm of risk or become history depends on choices still unmade. The record is dark. It is not yet finished. The past shows us the cost. The present shows us the pressures. The future is still unwritten. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Then Now Tomorrow videos.